Hello. They say marriage is built on trust, but trust is a funny thing. It can take years to build, yet only seconds to shatter. I never considered myself the jealous type, never saw the need to track my wife's every move or question her whereabouts. I believed in the kind of love where you don't have to ask, where you just know the person beside you is faithful. Turns out, I was the fool. For the past 7 years, I had been married to Lauren. We weren't perfect, but no couple is. Life had settled into a routine. Work, bills, weekends spent running errands rather than chasing adventure. We had our ups and downs like anyone else, but through it all, I thought we were solid, comfortable, safe. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had been too comfortable, too blind to see the cracks forming right in front of me. Our 10th anniversary was coming up, a milestone that deserved something special. Over the past few years, romance had taken a back seat to responsibilities, and I wanted to change that. I wanted to remind her of the life we had dreamed of before work schedules and mortgage payments got in the way. So, I planned a surprise. I booked a weekend at a luxury hotel, the kind of place we used to fantasize about when we were younger, scraping by on cheap takeout and dreaming about someday. Someday had finally arrived, and I was ready to make it happen. I could already picture her reaction, her eyes lighting up, the way she'd throw her arms around me, maybe even get emotional at the effort I had put in. Lauren had always loved surprises, always said I wasn't spontaneous enough. This would prove her wrong. At least, that's what I thought. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing the confirmation email, double-checking all the details before finalizing my plans. I was smiling to myself, already anticipating the perfect weekend. That's when I heard her voice from the next room. She was on the phone. I didn't think much of it at first. Lauren talked on the phone all the time, catching up with friends, discussing work, making plans, but something about her tone stopped me. It was softer, almost giddy, the way someone sounds when they're talking about something exciting. And then, I heard her laugh. It wasn't the casual kind, the polite chuckle she used in conversations. This was different. This was intimate. A sound I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Something in my gut twisted. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just on edge from planning the trip, from wanting everything to be perfect. But then, she said something that made my blood run cold. She was talking about a trip, a weekend away, our anniversary weekend. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, frozen in place. I strained to hear more, piecing together the fragments of her conversation. She was excited, going on about how much she needed this, how she couldn't wait to finally have some time together. But she wasn't talking about me. I sat there, motionless, the confirmation email still glowing on my screen. My heart pounded in my chest, the rhythm slow and heavy, like the moment before a storm hits. It felt like the walls around me had suddenly closed in, like the air had become too thick to breathe. I needed to be wrong. I had to be wrong. With stiff fingers, I navigated to the hotel's website, logging into our shared rewards account. My pulse quickened as I scanned through past bookings, my stomach tightening with every click. And then there it was, a reservation under her name. The same hotel, the same weekend, but booked a month before I had even thought of the idea. My breath came out in short, shallow bursts as I stared at the screen, willing the words to change, for some logical explanation to appear. But there wasn't one. Lauren had already planned a romantic getaway, and it wasn't for us. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the weight of it all settled onto my shoulders. The room felt eerily silent now, the only sound the dull hum of my computer fan. I felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, like I was a spectator in my own story, witnessing something I couldn't stop. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, each more painful than the last. Was this the first time? Had I been blind for years? Had every late night, every unexplained outing, every moment I chalked up to stress been something else entirely? I had never gone through her things before. I had never felt the need to. But now, I had to know. With a sense of dread clawing at my insides, I checked our bank statements. I scrolled through transactions, searching for anything that didn't make sense. And then, the pieces started clicking together. Dinners at places I had never been. Spa appointments on days she had told me she was working late. rideshare charges that ended nowhere near our home. I had been a fool. I didn't remember standing up, didn't remember moving, but suddenly I was pacing the room, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to storm into the next room, confront her, demand answers. But I didn't. Lauren had already rewritten our anniversary weekend. Now, I was going to rewrite the ending. I sat in my office for what felt like hours, staring at the reservation confirmation like it might somehow change if I looked long enough. But it didn't. The reality of it stood firm, undeniable. Lauren had planned our anniversary weekend in advance, just not for me. The initial wave of shock faded into something colder. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was processing, piecing together every little moment, every red flag I had ignored. The nights she stayed late at work, the sudden interest in self-care trips, the way she had stopped reaching for me in bed. It had all been leading up to this, and I had been too blind to see it. But now, I saw everything. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw accusations at her feet like some betrayed fool hoping for an explanation. I knew how that would go. She would cry, spin the narrative, make me feel like I was crazy. No, I wasn't giving her that chance. If she thought she had been clever, thought she had gotten away with it, then she had already lost. I needed proof. Real, solid, undeniable proof. Not just for me, but for when I took everything from her. I started by checking her email. Lauren had never been particularly protective of her passwords. She always believed I had nothing to hide, so why should she? It was almost laughable now, how easily she had accused me over the years, all while keeping her own secrets buried just beneath the surface. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A confirmation email. The same hotel, the same dates. And the guest listed under her reservation? David. I let out a slow breath, staring at the name like it might rearrange itself into something harmless. But it didn't. I knew a David. He was a coworker she had mentioned in passing, someone she had supposedly been mentoring. I had never given him a second thought. But now, I knew exactly who he was. I searched her emails for his name. Messages popped up, dozens of them, carefully worded but not careful enough. They were smart, never explicitly saying what they were, but the meaning was clear. Coordinating schedules, meeting places, vague mentions of how much she needed this. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I checked our bank statements next. Lauren had always been careful with money, but even the best liars make mistakes. There were restaurant charges I didn't recognize, little expenses that added up, flowers, small gifts, Uber rides that never made sense at the time. And then, there was the final piece of the puzzle. The second phone. I had never noticed it before, tucked away in her nightstand, probably used only when I wasn't around. It was a cheap burner phone, nothing fancy, but when I powered it on, the messages were right there, waiting for me. Lauren hadn't just planned a secret getaway. She had been having an affair for months. I scrolled through the messages, my heart beating steadily, no longer from panic, but from resolve. They had been meeting regularly, sometimes while I was at work, sometimes when she was supposedly out with friends. They had joked about me, about how oblivious I was. She had written things about me that made my stomach turn, laughing about how routine our life had become, how predictable I was. Predictable. That word stayed with me, settling into my bones like ice. Lauren thought she had me figured out. She thought she could live this double life, thought I would stay the trusting, clueless husband while she planned her future without me. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure when she lost everything, she never saw it coming. So, I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I closed the laptop, erased my tracks, and went back downstairs like nothing had happened. Because as far as Lauren knew, nothing had. I let her kiss me goodnight that evening, let her tell me she was tired from a long day. I watched as she settled into bed beside me, her breathing steady, her betrayal resting between us like a ghost I could no longer ignore. She thought she was winning. She had no idea the game had just changed. The next few days passed like nothing had changed. Lauren still smiled when she left for work, still gave me absent-minded kisses before bed, still scrolled through her phone with that faint, secretive smirk I had once ignored. But now, I saw it all. The way she carefully tilted her screen away from me, The way she slipped upstairs to change the moment she got home, probably to check for messages without me looking over her shoulder. I played my role perfectly. I didn't act different, didn't give her any reason to think I suspected a thing. If anything, I became more relaxed, more agreeable. If she thought I was slipping into complacency, into blind trust, she wouldn't see what was coming. Then, something unexpected happened. Lawrence surprised me. On Wednesday evening, I got home from work and found a neatly wrapped box on the kitchen counter with my name on it. It wasn't my birthday, wasn't any special occasion that I could think of. A card sat beside it, with a short message written in her handwriting. Just because. Love, Lauren. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind racing. Guilt gift? An attempt to keep me off her trail? Or was this something more calculated? Her way of maintaining control, keeping me tethered while she slipped away to be with him? I unwrapped the box carefully, half expecting something meaningless inside. But what I found made my stomach turn. A brand new watch. A very expensive watch. The kind of thing I had mentioned wanting once months ago in passing, but something I would have never bought for myself. Lauren had always been practical with money, never the type to splurge on unnecessary gifts. And yet, here it was, sitting in my hands, a perfect, thoughtful present that seemed out of character. My first thought was that she had bought it to ease her own guilt. My second thought was that David had bought it. I checked our bank statements later that night, combing through every detail with precision. There was no charge for the watch anywhere. No withdrawals that could explain such an expensive purchase. Which meant only one thing. Someone else had paid for it. Lauren had just gifted me something from her lover. The thought sent a sick sort of amusement through me. She had no idea that I knew. No idea that her well-planned deception was crumbling under her feet. And yet, here she was, handing me evidence of her affair with a smile. That's when I knew I needed to step things up. I had been patient. I had collected my proof, moved my assets, planned every step to make sure when I left, she would walk away with nothing. But now, I wanted more than just a quiet, clean exit. I wanted her to feel it. The kind of shock that would make her heart drop into her stomach. The kind of realization that would shatter whatever fantasy she had built with him. She thought she was in control. She had no idea she was the one walking into my trap. So, I smiled, thanked her for the gift, and told her how much I loved it. Because soon, she was going to learn what it felt like to be played. I had all the proof I needed, but I wasn't satisfied with just knowing. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to catch Lauren in the act, not just for my own closure, but to ensure there was no way she could spin this into something it wasn't. She had spent years turning every argument, every situation, into something that made me the villain. But this time, she wouldn't have a single excuse. I had already checked her emails, her messages, her call logs. I had tracked her car, watched her patterns, seen the hotel reservations. I knew exactly when and where she was meeting him. But rather than storm in, catching them in bed like some overplayed movie scene, I wanted something cleaner. She had no idea I was planning anything. That was the beauty of it. She thought I was still the oblivious husband who trusted her, who took her word at face value. She had become so comfortable in her lies that she didn't even bother hiding them anymore. That's when I got an idea. Lauren had been slipping away more often under the excuse of spa days and self-care weekends. I had pretended not to care, even encouraged her, telling her she deserved some time to herself. That was exactly what she wanted, my permission. She thought she had me trained, that I wouldn't question her anymore. So, when she mentioned another spa weekend, I didn't just agree. I offered to pay for it. I even bought her a new bathrobe and slippers, playing the role of the doting husband to perfection. She looked so smug when she kissed me goodbye, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder, promising to call before bed. The moment she drove off, I got to work. I had already found out which hotel she was using. One of those boutique places just outside of town, the kind with private entrances and no questions asked. I knew what room she had booked. The payment history was right there in our shared account, though she assumed I'd never check. Rather than rushing there, I took my time. I wanted them to settle in. I wanted them to feel comfortable. When I arrived, I didn't go inside. I had no interest in a confrontation, no dramatic entrance, no screaming match in a dimly lit hallway. Instead, I waited in the parking lot with a clear view of the entrance, my phone camera open, recording. Lauren emerged from her car first, dressed casually, nothing that would raise suspicion. But then he got out of his own car, walking toward her like they had done this 100 times before. The casual touch on her arm, the way she tilted her head toward him, the easy familiarity, it was all there. They laughed. They looked relaxed. They had no idea they were being watched. I filmed everything, zooming in as they checked in at the front desk, as they received their key card, as they made their way upstairs. It was almost too easy. Once I had what I needed, I went inside. I wasn't there to see them. I had no interest in ruining my own night with that image burned into my brain. No, I was there to make sure my plan was flawless. I approached the receptionist, a polite woman who barely looked up from her computer. I told her I was there to surprise my wife and asked for a copy of the receipt. I even showed her the transaction history from our shared account, proving that I had technically paid for the room. She smiled, nodded, and handed it over without question. And there it was. Lauren's name, the date, the room number, and 2 guests registered. That was all I needed. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I spent the next few hours compiling everything. The videos, the messages, the hotel receipt. I organized it all into one file, easy to access, impossible to deny. By the time Lauren came home the next evening, she had no idea what was waiting for her. She strolled through the door, stretching, sighing about how relaxing her trip had been, her skin still flushed from whatever self-care she had indulged in. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and asked what I had done while she was gone. I smiled back, because the real surprise was yet to come. The moment Lauren walked through the door, she had no idea that her carefully constructed fantasy was about to crumble. She kissed my cheek like she always did after her spa weekends, stretching as if she had spent the last 2 days soaking in mud baths and sipping herbal tea. She looked completely at ease, oblivious to the fact that I knew every dirty secret she thought she had hidden so well. I didn't say anything at first. I let her bask in her delusion, let her believe, for just a little longer, that her world was still intact. That was the most satisfying part, watching her walk around like nothing had changed while I held all the cards. Then, I set my plan into motion. I had already scheduled everything to unfold perfectly. I waited until she was in the shower, humming some tune like a woman with no worries, before I pressed send. The email went out instantly. Attached were the videos, the texts, the hotel receipt. Every piece of undeniable evidence, neatly packaged and delivered to a very specific list of recipients. Lauren's parents, who had always thought she was an angel. Her closest friends, the ones who believed we had the perfect marriage. Her boss, who had no idea one of his employees was using business trips as personal getaways. David's wife. That last one was my favorite. Once the email was sent, I turned my attention to the next part of my plan. I had spent the last few days making sure Lauren would return home to nothing. While she was out enjoying her little affair, I had emptied our shared accounts, moved my assets, and signed the paperwork to put our house on the market. Lauren had spent years thinking she had me figured out, that I was too predictable, too trusting to ever do something like this. But she had underestimated me. She stepped out of the shower, drying her hair, completely unaware of the chaos about to unfold. Then her phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. A steady stream of notifications, one after another. At first, she ignored them. Then, I saw her expression change. Her brows furrowed as she swiped through her messages, scrolling faster and faster, her breath hitching as she realized something was very, very wrong. Then, her phone rang. Her mother. I could hear the panicked voice through the speaker, even from across the room. Confusion. Disbelief. Then, anger. Lauren turned to me, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to form words. But what could she say? She wasn't the victim here. I stood there, arms crossed, watching as realization dawned on her. Watching as she scrolled through the email, her own sins staring back at her. The videos, the messages, the receipt with David's name printed in bold black ink. And then, the final nail in the coffin. I tossed an envelope onto the counter. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already filed. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just stood there, breathing heavily, her face shifting between panic and fury. She wasn't sorry. She was caught. Then, as if on cue, another phone rang. David's wife. I almost laughed at how perfectly everything was coming together. Lauren finally found her voice, sputtering out excuses, reaching for me like there was something left to salvage. But there wasn't. Her life, the one she had so carefully crafted around lies, had just imploded in a single evening, and I was already walking away. By the time the sun set, she was gone. Thrown out of the house she once thought she had control over, left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. And me? I was free. Bye-bye.